Hello and welcome to Meeting People with me, Amal Pandya. Meeting People is a podcast where I have long conversations with adventurous, rebellious, and sometimes courteous free spirits. Right, thanks everyone for joining. Eagle-eared regular listeners will have noticed already that it's not our traditional intro music, and what you heard is a song by my next guest, Sasha Papadin. Hello, Sasha.
Hello, Amal.
Thanks for joining.
Pleasure.
Lots to talk about, particularly on the music side. But I thought what we'd start off with is just going back a generation, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about one of your songs, St. Petersburg Nights. What is the inspiration for that song? And what is it? What's the context for putting that together?
Yeah. Well, the song it's about my parents meeting in St. Petersburg. The original title was The Ballad of Val and Ella, which is my parents' names. And it's sort of kind of an imagining of, well, in a way, I'm putting myself in their shoes. So I'm singing it first person, but it's very much kind of a riffing on their story of how they met in St. Petersburg. My father was Russian and my mother was English, and she was on a package tour of England in the late 70s and met my father. He was a pretty wild poet.
In Leningrad?
In Leningrad at the time, yeah. And they fell in love, and she went back to England and eventually flew back on her own and married him, and they, emigrated to the UK. But that first time when they were getting to know each other in Leningrad, my father was being followed by the KGB, and he'd had a history of being a sort of a dissident troublemaker,
right,
in their eyes. And so they were, they have these amazing stories. Well, they're both gone now, but they've, I was raised on them, being followed by a black car down the streets,
yes,
and the phones being tapped, and stopped at every train station or border crossing, and that whole thing, like total Cold War, craziness. So the song is really about that. It's about falling in love, against that backdrop.
And what was his gripes about the Soviet Union? What was he dissenting against? I know it's obvious, but what caused, from your memory, what caused him to kind of not toe the line?
Yeah, well, he, I think it was I think he had a really strong anti-authoritarian strain to him on a personal level. His stance wasn't overtly political. It bled into that. But, it started when he was, 18, and he had to go into forced military service. I think you served like 2 or 3 years there, right?
Right.
And
when was this roughly? Sorry.
Like, I think it would have been 1960, 63. Yeah, somewhere around there.
So at the height of the tensions. Cold War, where it was really kind of touch and go whether civilization was going to carry on or not.
Yeah, exactly. And he was, he was a kid from Siberia. He was already starting to write poetry. I think, he was very free spirit. And the idea of being forced to serve in the military for 2 or 3 years was just something he couldn't even process. Yeah. And so going into it, he'd been reading a lot about schizophrenia and really studied how to fake these symptoms. And when he joined or was forced to join the army, he began exhibiting these symptoms in an attempt to get kicked out.
Yeah.
And they put him in a mental asylum for the criminally insane. And he spent a few months there and was eventually released. But the authorities, I think, had a feeling that he was faking.
Yeah.
And so I think he was kind of on a list. I think they were keeping an eye on him. Clearly, this guy is a troublemaker. He's not towing the party line. And then when he's out, now he's, 20, 21, and he's in Leningrad, and he's starting to write poetry, and the poetry's all about freedom and all these things. Now you've got even more reason to have him on a blacklist,
Yeah.
because they were surveilling all of the artists at that time, So he sort of, he was on their radar. And once you're on the KGB's radar, you just don't really get off of it.
No.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think, this podcast is the theme of it, as you know, is people who don't listen to the rules or don't like being told what to do in many ways. And the national service, I have friends who kind of, I get it. I get the thesis behind it. I mean, even today, there's issues with young people, and that's why maybe give them some structure and give them something to kind of teach them basic life skills before they go into the real world. But the reality is that it's a real one-size-fits-all solution, and it's no accident that people that tend to come on this podcast or like it are more of the artistic flavor, because they're the first people that are purposefully or not trying to find where the rules don't work or where they don't apply. But there's a cost to that, I'm guessing. And you don't have to answer this from your dad's perspective, but do you think that in the last podcast with Alex Martin, I asked him a question about a phrase of his called déformation professionnelle, where you kind of, you become the thing you do. Do you think there was a cost to him learning to be schizophrenic and then acting it and then having to sustain that act in the one place surrounded by schizophrenic peers? Do you think that kind of, for people, you can talk about your father or not, but for people, that's an unintended consequence of getting out of national service effectively?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I know it affected him. I think, having kind of a bohemian artistic lifestyle allows you to fold that in kind of quite seamlessly, because artists are generally a bit crazy. So, and he was interested in that line between, what's real and what's imagined.
Yeah.
Which I think artists are always sort of like going over that border. And he was perpetually working on this memoir. He wrote a short memoir, and before he passed, he had written a sort of a more expanded version, and a lot of it took place in that place. So it clearly haunted him, and it was clearly something he was still processing. It really defined a lot of his life.
Yeah, again, like you can imagine being in his shoes in the asylum and going, God, can I do another day of this? Maybe I just do the national service.
I asked him that once. I said, like looking back, don't you think it would have just been easier just to like go and do a couple of years, 2 years? And he said his response was, he couldn't. That wasn't really part of his character to take orders in that way. And also, it's not just like, like doing national service in like a pleasant country. I think the death rate among conscripts in the USSR at the time was a staggering amount. I think it was like 5% or something. Right. The beatings, the hazing, all of that stuff. It was not an easy journey.
And you've got a target on your back from the proper soldiers who probably resent you a little bit for having to, Particularly they'll see the spot the artistic ones from.
Oh yeah, the little daisies. Yeah, yeah.
And so, how much of, obviously, you're a musician, in part. What you've used a phrase called the Renaissance man. What does it mean to you to aspire to be a Renaissance man? Can you define it for people listening, actually, and then talk about what it means to you?
That definitely comes from my father.
Yeah.
He raised me with that phrase, and he would always say, you have to be a Renaissance man. You have to be able to do many things well. And My definition of that is that in the study of learning to do something, you learn more about yourself and about all the other things that you have previously learned or mastered, hopefully. That sort of that process of learning is the important part. In a way, once you've learned something or hopefully mastered it, you're done with that now. You don't really, you can kind of put it aside, because it's sort of, you've explored it all, And so he instilled in me that appreciation for that process. And so that's what a Renaissance man to me is. That's something that I admire in people that have that in the arts, but also everywhere else. I think entrepreneurs and business people have an amazing sort of potential for creativity and being a Renaissance man. And I love that spirit in any sector, not just in the arts.
Yeah, a friend of mine challenges me not to talk about Steve Jobs in every damn podcast episode I do.
Right.
Sorry, Jan. Here we go. His big thing was operating at the intersection of technology and humanities, or science and humanities. You need to understand both. And the kind of purist engineer mindset always looks at things from a perspective of what can't be done. And a pure artist looks at things from maybe an impractical, non-real world sense. So if you can mesh together different skills, you've got a chance of creating something that can have a lasting impact. I guess a challenge for the sake of a challenge is, does one at some point in life need to kind of triple down on a mission or a calling?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Rather than
being a dilettante.
Yeah, which has a romantic, but do you get shit done by being a dilettante versus doubling, tripling down on your calling?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's a danger. I do. I think you can get. That's why I think the key is, I mentioned, mastering something. Seeing a dilettante won't do that.
Yes.
And I think you can't lose sight of that. When you see something, you can't just take a class in how to crochet and say, right, I've done that, and then move on. It's like the point is to kind of really figure it out and understand it, so fluently that you can put it aside now. And, you've gleaned what you could from that process, but it's only really when you've mastered it that I think you're kind of there.
It sounds like a mindset rather than a goal setting approach. Is that right?
Yes, correct. I think so. I think so. That's and it, not to get too pretentious about it, but I think it kind of it reveals the silver thread that can run through a lot of things that seemingly don't really go together, like you mentioned. Arts and science and all that. There are these silver threads, and when you start to see them, that's really illuminating.
Yeah, I'm going to rehash a story from the first episode I did with an investor called Simon Evan Cook. He talks about a celebrity chef who was invited by the Royal Navy to look at how they basically keep submariners healthy.
Okay.
Because they're under, they have a pretty sedentary existence when they're on tour or under the water for months on end. And he effectively figured out, using the technique of sous vide, which a naval procurement officer would just not have the ability. And it took a few goes and iterations over the course of the TV series that kind of shadowed this.
Yeah.
But effectively, he found a way to sous vide and vacuum pack very healthy food, rather than having crates and crates of vegetables and stuff just coming in, taking up lots of storage space. You could, and the chef is therefore just warming stuff up that has been pre-prepared, that is healthy, and that meant they could be underwater for longer. They could patrol for longer, and people were kind of more nimble on their feet and more reactive. So a celebrity chef managed to kind of improve the defense of the realm in a way that a pure specialist with a who has tripled down on their field wouldn't have been able to do. And so bringing it out, that kind of beginner's mindset is this thing that goes around a lot. Okay, find the next thing that you can, people sort of revel in starting at the beginning again.
Yeah.
And approaching learning.
I think it's super valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where else? So, okay, no, let's talk about music then.
Okay.
Because that's what people have first heard about you. When did you first realize you were into music, or were you following instruction from your dad that I need to be a Renaissance man, so music is the first place?
No, so I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was younger. That was and I made a short film, and it was, no one is allowed to see it because it's the most pretentious piece of shit you could imagine.
Okay.
You know? It was like 12 minutes of pure pretension. But
we're not necessarily against pretentiousness on this podcast, as people may have noticed. But yeah.
Oh, you're going to love the rest of this interview then. When I made the short, I needed music for it. And so there was a piano in the house that I was living in, and I didn't know how to play it, but I just set up one of these mics on it. And I just was plonking around, literally memorizing. I played this key and then that key. It needed something very sparse and like piano, I said, very pretentious short film. You can imagine the score that goes with it. But when I was finished with the film, I realized it was trash, but the score was actually really good.
Yeah.
And there was something there. And the process of that was so much more satisfying and immediate than making the film, that I found myself coming back to that piano and playing some more, and then learning how to play music. And I was like, oh, this is so much better than raising some money to like shoot a film. And it's such a long process. You can just sit at the piano and write a song. So that kind of hooked me. And then I taught myself how to play guitar and piano, and I started writing. And that's what got me into it. And it totally took over.
You started writing songs.
I started writing songs, yeah. So I never, traditionally people learn how to play like covers, you learn how to play Wonderwall and then you start writing your music. I never learned how to do that. Even now when I try to do a cover, it's so strange to me. Now I can figure it out, but I went straight into writing original material because that came very easily to me.
Yes, although I want to challenge you on that, but keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that eclipsed film, and I switched. Passions.
Yeah, that's interesting because people tend to switch because they like the romantic idea of something, and then they start it and then go, oh, this is quite hard, let me switch to something else. And then they spend their whole life switching at the base, which is something that I have been guilty of at times.
Yeah.
And I just want to pick you up on that kind of, you sat on the piano and then all of a sudden you had a song that you'd never played, this instrument you'd never played before. What insights can someone listening glean from that? A lot of people would have a get out of jail card there and go, well, like, he's obviously just genetically predisposed to that. And so, that's not relevant to me. And maybe you're not trying to teach anyone anything by saying that, you're just recounting experience, but there must have been more to it than that. There must have been a persistence or a desire that caused you to do that, rather than you just were blessed with this endowment by up on high.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't very complicated. But I think the way something is sort of constructed has always appealed to me. A song or a movie or, furniture, and it's like, well, how does this go together and why does it work? And sort of, and so it was kind of there was some curiosity there.
Yes.
And then, look, I absolutely think anybody can sit down at a piano and not know how to play anything. You could literally just put, 15 notes together in sequence, and that is a song. There's that's not much to it. It might not be a great song, but that is something, you know. And if you like it and you think there's more to this mine, then you can go in and see what else you can.
And then you apply the craft mindset.
Yeah.
To that. And then iterate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And so you realized you started writing songs. Were you in parallel honing other skills at the same time, or were you totally focused on that?
No, I was doing that. I would say half the time, and the other half the time, when I needed to make money, I would do furniture restoration or design.
Yes,
and I would build, and
which is what you do full time. Not full time, but as your kind of primary.
Yeah. To make money, you certainly don't make any money on music.
No. Although we'll do a plug for your songs later, but you've got quite a few downloads on Spotify. It's very good. So we'll maybe one day keep going.
Yeah. I'm waiting. I'm ready.
Yeah. So how do you get into furniture? What we have a phrase, as you know, in English, so and so has become part of the furniture, which is a way of denigrating the person, but it also denigrates the furniture in some ways. Because
I find that a deeply offensive comment.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Well, exactly. That's the thing. The phrase is designed to something that you look at and you try and make as beautiful as possible.
Yeah.
Has become in the minds of people's background noise.
Yeah.
Or purely functional, but actually they probably derive huge value from it. They just don't realize it when they do walk into a room with beautiful furniture. Yeah. Or that's properly been made or thoughtfully put together by someone. And you're at the beginning of the food chain, or you're upstream to that. So
right.
How did you recognize that and get into it?
Well, doing repairs and restoration, I think, again, appealed to wanting to know how something works and why it's like that and how do you fix it, right? And there's a craft element to that. It's interesting, furniture is, especially on the restoration front, people have incredibly emotional attachment to their furniture. Some people don't realize it, but you have your favorite chair that you sit in, and it's not worth £5, but you wouldn't lose that for anything. Like you would sit in it, or your dining table or your sofa, right? People form very sentimental attachments. And so being, I started doing repairs and restoration. People would bring in pieces. It was like my grandma's table, or, I bought this chair and I nursed my kid in it and now I want to restore it. And having, break down in tears when the work was done, because it was the way they remembered it when they were a child, or when their child was young. So there was this very emotional aspect to it that I loved, and feeling like you're part of sort of a lineage of that particular piece. You're sort of keeping it from the landfill and putting it back in action, So to me, that's part of the craft thing, and the kind of the study of how something works. And I found it very compatible with making music. In fact, my music studio was sort of a walled off section of my shop. And a lot of my clients didn't even know I had a music studio back there. That was what happened in the evening there. But there was this kind of very simpatico relationship of craft between the two operations.
People from the outside would see dissonance, but actually they were, as you say, simpatico.
Yeah. To me, they were part of the same laboratory. Yeah.
Who are your heroes?
I would say people like Nick Cave is a huge hero of mine. People like
I'm gonna feign ignorance here.
Okay.
And therefore maybe one or two people listening too. So who is Nick Cave? Why should we care?
He's a Australian musician, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and he's just sort of an amazing creative mind. He's also a wonderful writer. He's written a lot about grief. He's an intellectual. He's written a lot about religion and spirituality and songwriting. He's kind of multi-talented. And I find him very inspiring.
Yeah.
I think he approaches life as an artist, in which I find kind of liberating. It's outside of just the music world. So he's a huge model and a reference point for me. People like Tom Waits, Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And more kind of meta to music from that Renaissance perspective.
Yeah.
Are there people, I mean, the obvious one is Da Vinci, who did the Vitruvian Man and was the kind of genesis of that concept of being very highly accomplished at lots of things, which we can aspire to. But on beyond music, who are the people you kind of have looked up to, who have been helpful to you?
I'm kind of blanking.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah. I mean, well, Steve, you mentioned Steve Jobs. I'll take that. You know, I mean, I find him inspiring, and
I do sense this sort of Steve Jobs about you, in that you're not a douchebag, obviously,
right?
Well,
so you're a terrible judge of character.
But that aesthetic sensibility, he couldn't buy furniture, right? Because he just couldn't. He didn't have the time.
Is this true?
Yeah.
Oh, really? I didn't know
His
that.
houses, where he lived for large parts of his life, he couldn't furnish them because he would find things ugly. And unless it was beautiful, he didn't want having to do it.
Oh, interesting.
So you'd go to his house and there was nothing there. And it was a weight that carried him right through to his final days. So he was, there's a really sad story of when he's recovering from a cancer operation.
Yeah.
And he's sort of flitting in and out of consciousness. And this nurse tries to put a respirator, or what they do is breathing masks over his, and he kind of rips it off and goes, this is ugly. I'm going to give you some designs to make this look a bit better, because there's 10 different ways we can make this more functional. And which is like, the nurse is like, can you just stop being a dick and just put it on? Right. And some people hear that story and go like, what a douche. And other people kind of go wild, like, you couldn't. That again, referencing back to Alex Martin, that distaste of ugliness, that dislike of ugliness, as a real thing to be avoided, which people don't think about. So I'm guessing that intentionally or unintentionally, you are focused on creating beauty for the world.
I think so. Or I think you're like something. I think when you're creating something, you're creating it because it's the way it's been done before is wrong. It feels wrong to you, and so you're trying to fix it or correct it. Otherwise you wouldn't do it. If somebody's done it, like you would, why would you be compelled to do that? So I suppose I don't really think about it in terms of beauty or not, but I just feel like I need to make a better version, a version that better represents, the world as I see it, or the world as I'm experiencing it,
Well, it's interesting because also, like, in the Soviet Union thing, because profit was frowned on, there was no incentive to do things differently or put your own flavor on them. So things just started looking the same. So glasses, mugs, tables, chairs, there was no point adding color to it because you're not allowed to sell it for any more than the person down the road. So you lost that artistic application on the world, whether from a commercial perspective or not. So maybe there's something there.
Yes. There's definitely a real beauty vacuum in that era of Russian creativity.
For a nation or a part of the world that has produced serious art.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of Russian literature?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's some of the best.
I've done some Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, and Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
The latter I've probably need to read again a couple of times.
Yeah.
My wife's more of a Tolstoy
Okay.
girl.
Yeah.
She's War and Peace. She's doing Anna Karenina now, actually. But one person I thought might resonate with you is Solzhenitsyn. Is that someone you've read much or looked at?
I mean, I've read A Day in the Life of
Yes.
yeah.
That's the one we all go for.
Yes. You know, my dad had very strong opinions about Russian literature, being a writer, and having read them all, and he was very opinionated, and he felt like Solzhenitsyn didn't quite, get up there with Pushkin and Dostoevsky and Gogol, So I think that definitely colored my opinion of it. He found him a bit, dry and pedantic. But I really enjoyed it, and I think it's fantastic. Also, this guy Lermontov, he wrote a short book called A Hero of Our Time, which is amazing. And but yeah, I mean, Russian literature, it's some of the greatest. There's
a great scene in. It's amazing how humorous a book like Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich can be.
Yeah.
For people who haven't read it, it's short. I highly recommend it. It's basically one day in the Gulag.
Yeah.
And there's a rule in the Gulag where if the temperatures hit below -40, no one has to work. And so every morning at a certain time after waking up, there's the checking of the thermometer. This guy has to kind of climb this pole.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of, as people walking past, nervous tension. Could today be the day? We don't have to go and do backbreaking labor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it feels that day that he's writing feels extra cold, and he's unwell, and he's umming and ahhing about whether he should go for the medical bay or not. And if he doesn't get in, then it's big problems. If he gets in, it's big problems. So there's no right, but this person kind of climbs the pole, and then, no, only -23 guys, back to work. And it was just written, it actually just, I was laughing, and it's obviously for something so deeply tragic.
Yeah.
I mean, so, flitting about from Solzhenitsyn to Orwell, who kind of said there's 4 reasons why people write, and one of the 4 reasons is for political reasons. I would put Solzhenitsyn in that camp. Right. He was, his aim was, yes, to maybe sound good and be beautiful, but more to shape the world in a certain way. And he was as successful as anyone by waking up Western intellectuals to the damage that was being done.
Yep.
You're a Hitchens fan?
Love Hitchens.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've never read any Hitchens.
I put him up there in my top heroes. Actually, I should mention him. Yeah, heroes / role models. Yeah.
Do you have any spirituality? And if so, does that create dissonance with Hitchens, or are you kind of aligned with him on his views on religion and God? And
yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't find it in contradiction to what he says. In fact, I love it. I mean, he was good friends, I believe, with Paul Tillich.
Right.
Do you know that fellow?
No.
I think he was English, but he famously said, when I'm speaking with an atheist, I'm a Catholic, and when I'm speaking with Catholics, I'm an atheist.
Yes, I like that. That resonates with me.
Yeah. I've never understood why that's like everything Hitchens says about religion. I completely agree with, and I think any serious Christian or serious, a person who's interested in spirituality, I don't see how they can be offended or find that in contradiction with what's so, obviously true.
My only pushback is, I don't think, maybe it's not a pushback, but religiosity or religious behavior is in human nature.
Yeah.
Maybe he was particularly religious about his anti-theism in some ways, but it's a bit like energy. It just goes from one form to another. And so we sort of shifted from Christianity to wokeism or greenism.
Yeah.
In a way, if you look at, I'm all for, maybe from a small c conservative standpoint, we have a duty to the environment for future generations. But environmentalism with a capital E has sort of become very religious. It's got its child profit. It's got, it doesn't tolerate dissent. And, at least the old religions that have been around for a long time have that sort of Lindy or durability to them, that have more guidance or insight for people in the world. And I do feel there's a bit of a vacuum, like kind of the wokeism just doesn't cut it.
Right.
For a young person coming, grappling with how to approach the world.
I know. It's inept. It doesn't, yeah. Yeah, and like the new gurus now,
Andrew Tate on one side, let's say.
Exactly, or like Jordan Peterson, or like those are like who young people are looking to for guidance, which is kind of, nothing against Jordan Peterson, whatever. Some of his stuff is interesting, but it's a bit pathetic if you're looking for a real sort of elder, input like that. If those are your options, that's rough, because religion's really not providing that right now. At least the mainstream religions aren't,
No. No, you kind of, they're so... Nietzsche predicted this, right? And it's sort of transpiring where you look at the Church of England, it's basically an atheist. It behaves like an atheistic institution that's so terrified of, upsetting upset a secular apple cart.
Yeah.
And it's creating this vacuum, and, we need... I guess, okay, so let me put it another way.
Yeah.
Your childhood was based on the experiences of some pretty dramatic experiences of your father that you've mentioned about, being, trying to basically run away from the authorities. Is there a danger as parents today that we are just over protecting or trying to mitigate too much downside for our kids, and not giving them those rich experiences that can inform an artistic sensibility? Whether it's helicopter parenting or, I know people who tend to be artists or entrepreneurs of a successful nature have some sort of challenging upbringing. Often, you look at Elon, Steve Jobs he had a very comfortable upbringing, but he was adopted. How do you approach parenting with your experiences?
What, like, do I make things as difficult as possible for them?
Well, that's the thing. Like, do you go, God, is this just all a bit too easy?
Yeah.
You're never going to have an edge because you don't. Yeah. You haven't experienced anything dangerous.
That's tricky. I don't think you can artificially create that. And
nor do you want to.
And what?
Nor do you want
to. Yeah. And also, so like, just speaking about my childhood, I think there was a very fine line that was often crossed between a very, wild, interesting bohemian childhood and being in and crossing the line into just like a chaos that kind of created some trauma and tension.
Okay.
Right. And that's never good. Tension is never good. You want to push somebody far enough that they can grow stronger from the experience, but you don't want to damage them or create strain that then it just sort of accumulates scar tissue throughout their life. Right. So,
and then you're behaving on the wrong motivations. You've got a point to prove, or you're in battle against the world rather than flowing with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we have a sick fascination with that, the value of that kind of suffering. Like
Yes.
even when you mentioned Steve Jobs, like that saddens me that he looked at the mask that way. Like that sounds like, could he not be free from his own sort of obsessiveness?
Yes.
And like, it would be great if he could just be a little more separate from it. If he just had a little bit less of attention around that, he would be liberated from it and still able to use it. And, that's the ideal.
That's reading his biography by Walter Isaacson was the running conflict I had in my head the whole way through. Like, don't park in the disabled bay. You don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Or like that mindset of, you had, he believed, whether he believed it or he was doing it just because he could, or just to test people, that he didn't smell, right? His diet, I don't need to bathe because...
Oh, he didn't bathe?
He did, well, when he was younger.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So when he was, Apple was doing well,
Yeah.
he was going into board meetings, he again wasn't wearing socks. And he's like, because of my diet, I don't sweat in a certain way that doesn't create, because I really eat fruit or something. Okay. And everyone's like, no, Steve, like,
right,
you need to have a bath before you come to board meetings.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I don't, 30 people tell you smell.
Yeah.
And you still don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And it's, and you think, okay, he got kicked out. Maybe when he comes back, he's going to be a bit more mellow. And it's like, and so that's the kind of grappling. Could he be him without, and still do what he did?
Yeah.
And maybe an answer is that some people just overweigh the impact they can have on the broader world and underweigh the negative impact as a result they have on people around them, close to them.
Totally. Yeah. And
one example of that, is when they were developing the screen of the Mac 2.
Yeah.
They were spending the kind of deadlines, all that kind of stuff, and the title bar, so where you kind of minimize, maximize, and it tells you what
right, the 3 buttons
window you've got open.
Yeah.
They were, the team was Steve was spending a bit too much time on this.
Yeah.
We've got other things we need to do to get this ready to ship on time. And he was like, can you imagine having to stare at that all day? We have to get this right. He was thinking, I'm not going to upset the team. I don't care about upsetting the team. I care about the millions of people who I want to bring into computing and make computing mainstream for it to be right for them. And my daughter, my family, my employees can, they're very tertiary to that. It'd be nice to be able to do both.
Yeah, but it's tough. And I think, most geniuses are very unpleasant.
Yes.
Van Morrison, Bob Dylan, the stories of people in the studio with them, they're just like, oh, they're assholes.
What was Bob Dylan?
I think Bob Dylan's a little kookier, maybe. He's more on the eccentric side. But Van Morrison's like, there's a lot of stories about what an asshole he was. But,
Picasso's a big one, wasn't he?
Yeah. Horrific, but at the same time, like, if you're in order to make something great, you have to ignore what the idiots around you are telling you to do. Yeah. Right?
It can't be done.
It can't be done. It can't be, you should make it sound like this. We need a hit. We need, whatever. So you're so used to ignoring them, and you have to, like if you're a polite person and a producer's like, hey, Van, like maybe try something like this. You'd be like, oh, okay, I'll try it. Thanks for your input. That you waste a day, you go down the wrong road. You have to develop this kind of asshole response because time is precious, and you have to like get in there and like let's stay focused on making something original.
And I think also you weed out people who aren't on board.
Yeah,
because if the mission is more important to your team than feeling liked, they're more likely to get it right than people for whom it matters, how they're approached or how they're spoken to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you worry about, or is AI an opportunity? And I'll give you some context for that question.
Yeah.
There's definitely a sense I get, and people have written about this, where the algorithm or the backward-looking data, the ROE, the ROI, return on investment for what has worked in the past is now dominating more than ever with, let's say, films. Every film's a reboot, it's a rehash, it's a prequel, it's a sequel. Every song now that is, I'm sure the recording studios are kind of like, look, we know what a hit song is.
Yeah.
So let's just stick to it.
Yeah.
And it's based on backward-looking data, not new, new insights. So we're running. It feels like we've hit the end of the road with music. You started with Bach, or it didn't start with Bach. Obviously, it started much before, but and it ends with Taylor Swift. And we're gonna, no disrespect, she doesn't really care what I think, I'm sure, but where does it go from here?
Yeah.
Or is the algorithm a huge opportunity because the AI will do that for you, and therefore real creators can then use that, fast track the muscle memory, and it'll be a much better environment for our, boutique artisanal creators such as yourself.
Yeah, I agree with the latter. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I'm hopeful about it. I think it's exciting. I don't know where it's going to go, but I think I think the time is right for a shakeup, and it's exciting when you don't know where art's going to go.
Yeah.
And I think the question now of what is an artist, if a computer program can do 90% of what you've been doing, what makes an artist and what makes a human, and I think figuring out what that question is really exciting. Because I think so many humans are just making music like a machine anyways. I'd rather a machine do it. I'd rather,
save them the time.
Yeah. So I'm not threatened by that, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I think there's, the amount of times you're in a studio, like you're spending all day and you're doing the same beat that's been recorded thousands of times before. And you're like, this is so ridiculous. Like, isn't there a way to make this happen more quickly so that we can get on with, the actual creativity? Yeah. And I look forward to the days when you can just go in and say, I want the Michael Jackson's beat from Billie Jean, and I want, the bass line from this song, and, like something in that style, and you can put it together. And then it's, you can sort of really put the human element on that. Because
we are doing that, whether we realize it or not. We are drawing on sources. Yeah. We're drawing on our own algorithms.
Yeah.
Because the impact of listening to Michael Jackson 100 times as a 17-year-old is probably playing out without you realizing it or not.
Yeah.
Now, when you're in the recording studio doing a completely unrelated song.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's some discomfort around that, because the busy work of doing things gives you the illusion that you're doing something or that you're creating something, but really, I don't think we are. We're just repeating.
Busy being busy.
Busy being busy. Yeah.
And it will be a big. It's quite scary, I guess, when tasks get taken away from you, and you're like, oh, now what do I do? And I think this is technology is a liberator, but it also, being liberated is it's not easy for those who are enslaved.
That's
sadly.
I'm sure there's an awkward transition.
Yeah, what do I do now?
Yeah.
So what is real creativity to you then?
God, real puff questions here, huh? Really?
Yeah, the hard ones come later.
God. What is creativity? Is that sorry?
Well, you mentioned that, it'd be good to get away the menial stuff so I can focus on the real creativity.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah.
So right. What does that...
I said that?
Maybe. People can rewind and check.
Yeah, I think I did. Well, I that's the question. I think that's what I think we'd be trying to figure out. I don't know the answer. Yeah. Because you're isolating it, from all the busy work, so we have, for the first time, we might be seeing it very clearly, like what is, this essential human element in creativity, and what is that, but padded with all of the rote, stuff that we've learned and recycled. So I'm excited to see what that is. But I don't know what it is. I think there's always an element of magic in creativity, something a little mysterious, not a little, very mysterious and unknown when something is coming together. And I think there's just an innate part of us that is really, drawn to that and is captivated by it. And
is that's the muse, as some people call it, the muse that comes to, you've got to turn up, but the muse will.
Yes.
Do you struggle
the muse,
with
higher energies, God, whatever you want to call it, like the spirit in the room, like whatever it is, but there's this thing that appears, right? And every writer and painter and, inventor knows it. It's bigger than you are, and it's mysterious, and you want to know more about it, and it's elusive. It's like you can't summon it. You can't. Difficult to describe, as you can see by my words, but it's real, and there is something hypnotic about it that you want to come back to it again and again.
And we're in a world of abundant disruption and distraction. How do you cope with being creative or practicing your craft with calls on your attention from your phone or your, the news? Do you have a protocol to switch off? Do you have any habits or tactics? Is it getting up early? Is it just turning up, making time for it? Or has it got harder?
Yeah, that's a good question. For myself, I think it's, there's something about turning up, and knowing when when I need it, in a way, for me, I work a lot at night or at evenings.
Interesting.
And I often find myself charged up, and I'll go and start working on something, and I always find out it was like a full moon that night, and I didn't know it at the time, So it was like, I don't know what that means, but something sort of was like, awakened and drawn to something, and it's like I need to go and communicate with this muse, You know what I mean?
And when there's no right answer, and if there is an answer, that kind of the magic gets taken away. Someone was asking, how do you define the divine? And like, well, I can't, because if I do, then it's not divine.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly. This mystery.
Yeah. Have you heard of there's a parable used by Peter Drucker, who's this management guru, but he calls it the three stonemason parable.
Okay.
And it's basically a man walks down the road, sees three stonemasons, and goes to the first one. What are you doing? I'm working hard to earn a living, to support my family, and be a good citizen. That stonemason goes to the stonemason. Number two, what are you doing? And the stonemason goes, I am practicing my craft to be the best stonemason in the world. And then stonemason number three looks up with the eyes of a zealot, with kind of energy and tension, and goes, I'm building a cathedral. And it's a great little story, but it's slightly frustrating in a way, because it means that you're permanently, I find myself turning away from stuff a lot because it's not my cathedral, but I don't know what my cathedral is. And it means that you don't do number two, and then you barely kind of do number one. because it's is that something that resonates with you, or do you feel like your cathedral is not just the stone, it's everything? It's the windows too. And
Yeah.
the furniture.
The furniture. Yeah. Were you not listening? I don't work in stone. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I don't. Yeah, I don't know what the cathedral is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I think it's definitely a search for it. I'm looking for that sort of experience. I guess I'm always trying to build it. I guess I am always trying to build a cathedral.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I never thought about it in that way.
But I guess it's the wrong mindset, because a cathedral indicates an endpoint, and there isn't one really.
Right.
You just got to keep going.
Right.
The journey is the reward, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just circling back to the parenting question.
Yeah.
Something that's been on mine and my wife's mind about parenting, and we've thought about how do you create some sort of edge or niche or differentiation. So it sounds awful. It sounds like you're designing a product, but giving your kids something that's sort of a little bit different. And one answer was, we should live abroad at some point.
Right. Oh yeah.
And then you start. Who knows when the university to conspire to it, or we've got to commit. But it's fun post bedtime chat to kind of imagine, where would it be, if you had the map in front of you, and you go, well, it's got to be somewhere hot or somewhere nice. Why leave England to go to another cold, wet, grey country?
Yeah.
Right. So you go, okay, so that writes off certain parts. I can't deal with bureaucracy. I can't deal with I want some good air quality. I want some nice scenery. I want some good weather. I need to be able to work. I need some sort of economic. And slowly you just narrow down everything. And the only answer
is to stay.
No. Well, maybe. Yeah, that's what happens. And oh God. Yeah. And we'll have this conversation in 40 years' time. Like, did you leave? No. But no, you end up, the answer has always been California.
Oh, yeah. Oh, interesting.
Now, it feels like that's no longer the case if you read the news. Now, people will be questioning why Sasha doesn't sound Russian or English, considering your parents are Russian and English. So I can, spoiler alert, you're Californian.
Yeah.
When did you go there? And what does it mean to you what does California mean to you? Because it has this magical sense in people's minds.
Yeah.
Which is maybe diminishing somewhat.
That's what drew my parents there. So we emigrated to California from England and then Italy. We lived in Italy for 3 years, and then we immigrated to California. This was in 1987. So I was 7 years old.
Right.
When we moved there. And my parents were definitely drawn to California because of that mythological sort of status that it has of being the Western frontier, the place you go to, make your own way, right? And it's always sunny, and there's always beaches, and everyone's tan, and it very much still has that spirit. It very much still does. It's, I think, changed, as it does. I think that, we've been living in England for the last, few years on and off. And I think going back has been very interesting, because we kind of seen it from slightly more of an outside perspective.
Yeah.
And like yourself, observing people's reactions when you mention California, everyone has that same reaction, like, oh wow, California, like it just has such a status in people's minds. You
think fresh orange juice, you think skiing, you think the beach, you think avocados and Silicon Valley and
Yeah.
and LA and Hollywood and but it's obviously a huge place,
It's huge.
and California isn't just LA,
Yeah.
or Venice, and it it's certainly a source of, you read about the homelessness problem, or the kind of the regulatory burden, the tax burden
Yeah.
that businesses have to go through, and the crime. There's a story, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, where people in certain parts they basically empty their cars at night, and they leave their car windows open, they leave the boot open, so that the car doesn't get broken into, because look, there's nothing to steal here.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel like if that's normal behavior, that feels like kind of end of civilization type stuff.
Yes.
Is that worry you, or do you think it's just part of the friction of life, and it's just a cyclical thing that will just over time progression and will take its normal course?
Yeah, I think so. All of those reports are true. I think they are. That is all pretty accurate. And we live north of San Francisco in the sort of wine country, and San Francisco is very much like that. Like the break, everyone. Like, I've known so many people that have had their cars broken into. I've had my cars broken into. People do leave their windows down sometimes, or they put a note in the window like "Nothing inside, please don't do it." And that is happening. That is happening. I think some of those stories are sort of taken out of context and amplified.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of very strange, murky interest groups that are, amplifying those stories in it.
What are they?
Well, I think there's a lot of right-wing conservative groups or states that want to paint California as a liberal disaster, whose policies are failing its citizens. This is what happens when you don't put people in jail for shoplifting. As shoplifting goes rampant, if you don't put people in jail for breaking into cars, this is what happens, right? Because that's why this is happening. Is like the San Francisco DA has sort of decided not to prosecute some of these low-level crimes. Yeah. And so that kind of opened the floodgates.
That's the reason they give. I have another view, but which we can talk about later. But has there not been some sort of business exodus from California to Florida,
like Texas or something? Austin. Yeah, no, there has been, but they leave. Some of them are probably going to come back. Yeah. Business-wise, it makes a lot more sense, like to leave, right? Like Tesla did and all that. That totally makes sense. But I don't know if California, it's at such a premium right now that you can't really open the floodgates to deregulation and all that stuff for like big factories, because it's so expensive. Like I don't know.
That isn't the problem, and I don't think California is unique. You go to any Western city, go to Paris, it's happening in London. Homelessness, crime. It's a function, I believe, of land basically being privately owned. And therefore, it's the one factor of production from an economic theory perspective that is fixed and is, and all of us are at the mercy of landowners who jack up the rents, jack up the prices because they can. Mm. And the more economic progress there is, the more the prices go up, the more land speculation goes on. And, we were talking about it earlier. It becomes, the cost of a coffee is not to the pockets of the people working in the cafeteria. It's going to the landowner to pay the rent. Mm. And this isn't a California specific problem. This is a UK, Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Think. Yeah, it's
it is at its most demonstrable at the most economically advanced, the most progressed parts of the West.
Yeah.
That's where the symptoms of this kind of land ownership manifest themselves. This is Henry George 19th century economist who argued this, that you shouldn't tax labor. There should be no tax on your wages, and you shouldn't tax capital. Actually, labor and capital are not in conflict with each other. The big conflict is labor and capital versus landowners, and something's got to break that, because people just can't get access to housing.
Yeah,
and hence homelessness. And he predicted in 1850, look, homelessness is going to go on the rise.
Right.
And you kind of read it and you go, oh wow, this is really playing out.
Yeah.
So maybe California will be the one that takes us out of this as a result, because they've got the most to lose.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people who have moved out of California.
Yeah.
Because there is a feeling that, I don't want to downplay the feeling that it has changed and it's gotten impossibly expensive to live there. It's very difficult to have a business there. The government is really cruel to businesses.
Right.
Very unfriendly. But I will say that a lot of people that I know who have moved to Texas and Florida have come back.
Yeah. No.
Or have talked about coming back, or have realized, oh crap,
there's no silver bullet.
Yeah. Or they realize, okay, yeah, I was paying 30-40% more to live in California, but oh my God, it was worth it.
Yeah.
Because if you've ever been in Texas, it's pretty magical at times, but for 8 months out of the year, it's an inferno.
Unbearable. Yeah.
Unbearable. And you're basically inside in air conditioning, cowering from life.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of this California,
it's
portrait
got
of
that
horror.
Because it is that magical place, really.
Yeah. And it's really the only state. I've explored the other states. My wife and children and I, we've traveled, and it's been really fun to open our minds to what it would be like to live in a place like Texas or Colorado or whatever. We love those states. We have friends and family there, but California's the only one for us.
And so, what has living in England confirmed that for you? And what's your experience of England? What is it? Looking at little old us here, versus this magical place that we recognize exists and is calling you back.
Yeah.
What's it been like here? The last 3 years, is it?
Yeah, on and off. Yeah, 3 years. It's been amazing. It's been a totally amazing experience. And going back to your parenting question of doing that, it's been an amazing experience for the kids.
Yeah.
To have that experience of a different way of living, even though we're very similar in a lot of ways, but there's some fundamental differences.
Yeah.
I think, I was born here and a family here, and I've always visited. So it's not unfamiliar to me, but living for a sustained period here definitely shows you how connected I think people are with each other. There's more awareness of other people. I think this, you can kind of take it for granted, but you're on this little island. You're in it together, whether you like it or not. And America is fundamentally a place for, individualism, right?
Yes.
Every man for himself, is very much still has that Wild West, pioneer mentality. And you see it in the way people just relate to each other in public spaces or on the road, subtle things. And you really notice the difference here.
Queuing,
yes, queuing, and or being on a packed train, but there's a quiet, there's a calm, because you put a bunch of Americans in a packed train, and you're gonna have so many viral videos going on, but people are, get out of my space, excuse me, it would just turn into a feral atmosphere very quickly. Yeah. And it's not that it doesn't happen here, but I've been in those situations where I've been so impressed by the generosity of space and, freedom with each other.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've taken a lot from this experience, from, you know, apart from obviously the culture and the history and the education, the, you know, the deeper appreciation for language and things like that. That's all. I knew I was walking into that, but it's this other thing, the way energetically people are with each other here, that I've really appreciated.
And you've got that English in you, haven't you? So that I guess helps you recognize it in some ways. And what's next for you then? What's the next craft or the next arm of the Renaissance man?
The next thing is I'm designing like a series of furniture, a custom of new furniture that I'm building for kind of an exhibition that I'm going to do in the fall. And the theme is sort of man's interference with nature. So it's going to be kind of working with more like sculptural wood pieces and turning them into functional furniture, but trying to find exactly that point that the interference is necessary to make it functional, but not really going beyond that.
Yeah.
You know, this idea that nature needs man to interfere, to bring order or function into itself. But also that if you go too far, then, you know, you've sort of killed the nature and it sort of loses its soulfulness. So it'll be kind of exploring that theme.
Nice.
Yeah.
Look forward to that.
Yeah.
And as you know, I have a traditional closing question, which I ask every guest, which is something I call the long bet, where you have a 10-year view to make a prediction. Predictions are just tax-free entertainment. A lot of people build careers around them, and they shouldn't. But for us, it's just a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Why 10 years? Because it's a meaningful time frame, I think, for something that you'd like to happen or something that you think would happen. And if it's something you'd like to happen, obviously, please avoid answers such as world peace or people being kinder to each other or queuing better or behaving better in the train. Do you have anything that you feel strongly about that you think will happen in 10 years' time, over 10 years?
Well, going back to the AI thing,
yes,
I think there's going to be some very exciting and, you know, new forms of art, especially in film and in music. And I'm really excited to see what that is, because I think it'll be unexpected and we don't even have the language or to even imagine what that's going to be. And I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to see what that is, you know.
I think I'm in exactly the same shoes as you on that. The fear for people is they don't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
And that for people is very jarring. And I sympathize with that. But the possibilities are so powerful. Even with mundane things like government services, healthcare.
Yeah.
You know, buying or selling a house. Can we please just fix that so that it's not such a stressful thing?
Yeah.
You know, once you get to a doctor, it's great, but the whole navigating the system can be just cleaned up. And then the artistic side is obviously, you know, we'll have to really build on the inheritance of the Hendrixes and the Rachmaninoffs or whoever it is, rather than just rinse repeat, because rinse repeat, as we've talked about, is done. It will be done at a click of a button.
Right.
And therefore, the world is our oyster. So I hope I can see only positive things, unless it's 10 years time. It is, you know, John Connor.
I mean, it'll be exciting.
I've literally seen this movie before.
Yes. I know. God, there is a terrible feeling that we're just inevitably going to go down the path of all the sci-fi film narratives we've all been raised on, right?
Films.
Yeah. Like Do you think there was some sort of intuitive premonition in them, or do you think that they're created and then people kind of are just gonna fumble in that direction because that's what they know and that what the images in their head from when
it's like
they
a
were raised on?
self-fulfilling.
Yes.
This reflexivity.
Yeah.
God, there's a story, I can't remember which one it is, where the AI just sort of flies away, looks at us and goes, yeah, that's all right, you carry on.
Yeah.
And that could be a eventuality. Like,
Right.
It was beneath us. And we're back to like, oh, okay.
Right,
back to, picking nits out of each other's hands.
Yeah, it's like, put me back in the box. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one. There's a book by E.M. Forster called When the Machine Stops, which is really interesting. It's written in 1910, really, and it's about this mythical world of where everyone lives underground and just sort of listens to records. It's a bit like Wall-E. Have you seen Wall-E?
No.
Anyway, Wall-E, your kids will love it. It's a great film.
Okay.
It's about, again, set in the future where everyone's overweight, living in capsules, and the machine, everything's done for you. And
Right.
a bit like the Matrix. You're kind of sat. You're in this sterile environment.
Yeah.
And used as a
battery.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's spoiler alert. It's a short story, so I'm not. There's lots of insights for people. Still read it, but at the end, the machine stops, and you're told that the air doesn't work. And it's this one guy who's like, a bit like your father, maybe just didn't like to be told the air doesn't work. Pokes his head out above, and you can breathe.
Right.
It's fine.
Right.
And then I think it's innate in us, this fear of technology. It goes back a long way.
Yeah.
There's a story of Claudius, Roman emperor, who an inventor came up to the court and said, I've developed armor which is unbreakable. I don't know. I think historians think he chanced upon some sort of kind of titanium alloy or something by accident, and was really excited because he thought, this is me made. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm kind of, riches, wealth, the lot. And Claudius goes, have you told anyone else about this? No, just you, Emperor. And then
killed him,
buried him with the tech, because he was too scared about the consequences.
Sure.
And steam power was discovered by the Macedonians, in Alexandria, but they were used for gimmicks. They weren't, there was too much fear, particularly amongst these hyper-ordered societies, particularly the Romans. What would the common folk do? They would rise up if they didn't have they didn't have drudgery. Orwell calls smothered by drudgery as a phrase that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
When you're not smothered by drudgery, all of a sudden the work's taken away from you. You go, hang on. Well,
this isn't technology, but also a very powerful piece of information. But that was why the Bible was kept out of so many. Yeah. It was kept out of the masses' hands. It was like the Desert Fathers were like, this information, to the untrained mind, it's going to corrupt them and it's going to give them all sorts of fucked up ideas. Yeah. And sure, they're not wrong about that. I mean, religion is in the wrong, in like untrained hands. Look what that's done.
Yeah.
Well,
it's an interesting question, because you asked an observer in the kind of 150 years after the printing press was invented.
Yeah.
Was that a good invention?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Like
on a cost benefit.
Like hundreds of millions of people have died because of
information
here. Yeah. Yeah.
If you took a purely rational scientific approach, which is has its place, but isn't, in a human context, not always the right way to look at things.
Yeah.
From a rational perspective, it was not a good invention.
Yeah.
And that was why the Catholic Church was so keen on avoiding services being in the vernacular, in the local language. But no, we'll look after that for you. We'll
right.
Decide what your relationship with God is.
Right.
Leave that without where the kind of And I feel like that mindset has not gone away. It's just been replaced by whether it's government or it's, and by government, I mean, you know, for example, financial regulators who are like, you know, no, will decide. You know, you'll have some very select gatekeepers who will manage your affairs for you because you're just, the risk to you is too great.
Right.
And I worry maybe that AI it's just too scary, and therefore it won't be allowed to kind of, let alone solve easy problems or easier problems in things like access to healthcare or smoother bureaucracy.
We just can't resist, though. We can't.
That's the thing.
It's like Oppenheimer. You know, we just can't resist. Like human nature just wants to go and poke every boundary as far as it can go.
And that push-pull tension between the order and the chaos.
Yeah.
We can't put the genie back in the bottle.
No.
So, yeah, I think, let's see, 10 years' time.
Let's see.
So, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you very much for sparing the time. I think it's only fitting that we are seen out by St. Petersburg Nights, which is now coming over my voice. But would love to have you back on again soon. And it's been an absolute blast. Thanks for sharing. Where can people find you?
Oh, you can look up Loverman.
Loverman?
Loverman, one word, on Spotify.
Is that you?
That's
Loverman?
that's
Loverman, Spotify.
Yeah.
And
or iTunes or whatever.
iTunes, Spotify. Yeah. And I will also point people to the direction of Furniture if there's an URL.
Oh, yeah.
In the show notes. And look forward to seeing that exhibition.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you.
Take my hand, I'm your man. You're off the reservation, baby. Do you feel free? It's gonna be a St. Petersburg night. You and I in the never-ending light. It's gonna be a St. Petersburg night. You and I, you and I, you and I. Listening to my dire straits, hoping that true love waits. I'll see you on the other side. Thank you for the ride. Followed by the KGB, baby. Followed by a long black car. Followed by the KGB, sugar. But they don't know where we are. Just lost in the haze. It's gonna be a St. Petersburg.